Okay, it's 7 o'clock. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this evening for the second installment in a series of discussion on the topic of social justice. As you are aware, Black and Brown people are constant subjects of an unjust system and an unfair policing system whose players act as judge, jury, and executioners. As such, people of color are being slain in the streets. We recently witnessed the shooting of Jacob Blake, a Black man who was shot 7 times in the back in the front of three of his 3 sons. Fortunately, he survived that attack, but his children must live with the trauma of seeing their father gunned down in front of them for the rest of their lives. Events take place in our education system that do not receive the same level of attention as the trauma experienced by Blake's son. As such, many of us are not aware of the challenges our children experience daily in our school system. This evening, that is what we want to discuss, the impact of injustice on the development of young Black and Brown students in the American education system. And so and to some degree globally as well. This evening, we have a number of distinguished individuals who are part of our panel who will help us understand the impact of inequality and inequity on the development of young people. These men and women will be introduced by my co-host, Pastor Miles Young, who I have the privilege of sharing this platform with. Pastor Young. After Pastor Young's discussion, we'll get right into this wonderful subject that I think will open your eyes to many of the things that we are currently experiencing. But let me quickly point out that this is not just simply a discussion between the panel members and the host. It's a discussion that involves you as well. So you have the opportunity this evening to join the discussion. And that's why we made it available for you to post your comments or your question on YouTube. Any comment that you post or question that you post, if time permits, we'll make certain that we share them with the panel so they can address that. At this time, we're going to ask Pastor Young to start the introduction by introducing our panel.
All right, let's pray real quickly. Most gracious Lord Father, we just thank you for the ability to come together and just learn, Lord. We pray that you grow us, teach us, and guide us. In your name we pray, amen. All right, everyone, I am very excited to introduce everyone we have on our platform, beginning with Rachel L. Rogers, former Douglas County 2016 through 2017 Teacher of the Year, has been educating, empowering, and transforming the lives of students and teachers for the past 25 years. Her determination and passion has allowed her to be in a position to affect change not only with her students, but also outside of the four walls of her classroom. She has used her expertise to help both novice and seasoned educators become more effective in the classroom. Although she is a science teacher by trade, she is currently the AVID coordinator and elective teacher at New Manchester High School in Douglasville, Georgia. AVID, Advanced Via Individual Determination, is a college and career readiness system which seeks to close the achievement gap by preparing all students for success. Her passion is people, and her goal is to use philanthropic means to open doors of opportunity for others through education. I must note that I am a AVID graduate from my high school, so she holds a special place in my heart. Next, we have LeVar Hickerson. LeVar Hickerson has served in education for 16 years. His career journey has consisted of a social studies teacher, social studies department chair, professional development facilitator, RTI behavior specialist, and currently a 7th grade administrator at the Woodland Middle School. He has earned his Bachelor of Science degree in psychology, master's in secondary education, and educational specialist in educational leadership. LeVar Hickerson has been chosen as the Teacher of the Year for Woodland Middle School during the 2012-2013 school year and Professional of the Year during the 2018-2019 school year. During his leisure time, he enjoys working out, writing music, and directing choirs. His educational philosophy is he believes that all children have the ability to learn if given the opportunity to receive a quality education through a partnership between school and the community. Every child is unique, and with guidance and support, they can use their special gift to make a difference in themselves and our world. Kalila Logan was born in Jamaica and immigrated to the United States at a young age. Having experienced firsthand the inequalities within the academic system in several states, she decided to pursue an individualized study degree at the New York University. Her concentration, globalization, media expression, and education inequity centered on the investigating knowledge and power as tools to manipulate and limit access to higher education institutions. She spent a year abroad in Ghana, where she intimately studied the academic and cultural effects of globalization from colonialism to present. During her time in Accra, she worked with several NGOs working on curriculum formation, instruction, and literacy projects. Following her graduation from NYU, she served as the sponsorship director for Tanzania Education Corporation in Karatu, Tanzania, for the past year. Her work involved overseeing the sponsorship program, providing social and academic support to disadvantaged students. Currently, she is pursuing her master's at Stanford University in international comparative education. Her hope is to conduct research contributing to the abolition of inequity in higher education, particularly across the African diaspora. As a recipient of the Gates Millennium Scholarship, Kalila hopes to empower the next generation of students to achieve the impossible and pay it forward. Dr. Deshawn Preston serves as the research associate for UNCF's Frederick D. Patterson Research Institute. Within this role, Deshawn is responsible for redeveloping a transformation assessment tool for institutions of higher education. He has led several projects that provided professional development to personnel from HBCUs who were interested in honing their data skills. As an active member in the field of higher education, Deshawn serves as a young scholar for the editorial board for the Journal of the Negro Education and the vice chair for the Council of Public Policy in Higher Education for the Association of the Study of Higher Education. Deshawn considers himself to be an advocate for historically Black colleges and universities, and those who are often forgotten in the field of higher education. He has an edited book and authored several reports, articles, book chapters, and blogs on the advancement of HBCUs. Before joining UNCF, Deshawn served as the Institutional Effectiveness Program Manager at Morehouse School of Medicine. He holds a PhD in educational leadership from Clemson University and an MA in history from Howard University and a BA in history from Oakwood University. Some of the most just motivating things I've read so far. Next, we have Robert Bennett. Mr. Bennett is an attorney and international business consultant. He was the lead government affairs consultant to major international companies on the major infrastructure projects in a number of African countries. Just to name one for time, we have Chevron International Petroleum on the development and implementation of the West Africa gas pipeline. Mr. Bennett has a long-standing relationship with the African National Congress of South Africa. He was an observer at the constitutional negotiations for the new South Africa on May 15th and May 16th, 1992 at the World Trade Center in Johannesburg, South Africa. He is a graduate of Dartmouth College and Yale Law School, It is at the former, however, that he is currently a leader of the Black Lives Matter initiative and seeking racial justice and reconciliation through diversity, inclusion, and equity. And we absolutely cannot let him leave this place without telling us more about that initiative. Before we begin, I'd like to read an excerpt from the British Department for Education, 2016. It says, "Education is the hallmark of a civilized society, the engine of social justice and economic growth, the foundation of our culture, and the best investment we can make in the future of our country. The better educated our society, the fairer, more cohesive, productive, and innovative it can be. An excellent education unlocks opportunity, helping children from all backgrounds to shape their own destiny. Whether they live and whatever their background, ability, or needs, every child and young person in this country deserves a world-class education that allows them to reach their full potential and prepares them to succeed in adult life. Educational excellence everywhere." I'm going to go ahead and ask the first question. I know you guys are probably tired of my voice, so I'll mute myself after this. First question is, and I'll ask it to, the first person I see is Deshaun. So you can begin and then we can just move down the line. It says, what is the role of the educational leaders when it comes to social justice and education?
That's a heavy question. I would say the role of an educator to kind of the first thing is actually to dismantle the current education system that we have, if we're going to be realistic. Because when you look at education in all of its facets, from pre-K to a PhD, the policies, the procedures, the system was not created for Black people to succeed. And it also wasn't created for people who come from low income backgrounds to succeed. So, and so ultimately, I would say an educator has to accept that and realize that if a student comes in as Black or low income, they're already at a disadvantage. And they have to work from there. I think oftentimes educators and people, you tend to want, not even educators, people in general, we want people already perfect and ready. And that's just not reality. And so I would say we have to, especially educators, acknowledge your privilege. Black, white, Asian, it doesn't matter, because the fact that you're an educator actually means you have some type of privilege because you are educated. And so once you acknowledge your privilege, we have to begin to understand and build a relationship with their students. And I'll say this, and then I'll kind of pass it on. Everybody has the ability to learn. I think oftentimes we look at students and we say they don't have the ability to learn. Yet I've seen people with terrible grades in a classroom know how to manage money. And let's be realistic. They're people, they can write songs, they're rappers, they're poets, they're hustlers. They're intelligent in sports. They have a gift. Everyone has the ability to learn. Everyone doesn't have the ability to learn at the same level in the same manner. And so an educator has to be willing, and I do understand, I'm sure we'll get into it, there are some parameters that are in place that really allow educators to specialize in what students' actual needs are, but to do that as they best can to serve the student and make sure that they can succeed.
Okay.
All right, well, I'll chime in and just basically piggyback on what Deshaun is saying. And from an educator, like for instance, when we're in the classroom, there's something that we always talk about: diagnostics. So with that being said, we're always using these key terms of readiness level or meet the child where they are. We say that, but we're not really doing that. So that's basically what Deshaun is saying, is that when these students come into our buildings at kindergarten level, if you're not from a flourished community, in pre-K or even your readiness level at home is going to be completely different. So when we have our students coming in, we have to meet those students where they are. We have to teach them because we're looking for growth. So meet them where they are. And then also I would just add in, when we're talking about teaching the whole child, that's what we mean. So we need to teach them how to give back into their community. We don't teach that. And then also social emotional learning is very important. And then lastly, for high school and so forth, everybody is not going to sit behind a desk. And so that's okay. With blue collar and white collar, it's okay. And we need to teach our kids that is okay.
If I can piggyback off of LeVar, I believe our role as educators is to be change agents and to be okay with going against the grain. We have to open up. There's an achievement gap really because there's an opportunity gap and an expectation gap. If you close that, there will be no gap. So when you're in a position as an educator, you have to leverage all of that and level the playing field so that those kids who come in at a lower readiness level still have the same opportunities as other kids who are at a higher opportunity level. And because of what you said, Deshaun, because it is so systemic, many times as educators, you can easily fall in line because you're trying to keep from going against the grain. But there's a delicate balance that you have to fall into and remember, yes, the curriculum is important, but at the same time, these are individuals that I must reach in order to empower them to know that the possibilities are endless. I have students right now in AVID, and Miles, you know a little bit about that, who to get even into AVID, you have to be in the middle of the road, which means you're not necessarily high achieving, but you're not low achieving. But many of these students will tell me, I never knew I could take honors classes. I never saw myself taking AP classes. So literally, I have to shift their thinking and think about our Black and brown children who society has told them they are less than. Society is showing them images daily that you have no worth. So if there ever was a time that it was critical for us to give these kids the opportunities and to have the expectations for them at the right level, now is the time.
Wow. And we're going to continue with that. But before we move on, I want to, before Dr. Bennett and Kalila jump in, I want to elaborate. I want you to elaborate on that for a second here, Rachel, and that is the achievement gap. You mentioned an achievement gap and an opportunity gap. Now, can you help us understand that those two terms and what are some of the contributing factors that leads to this achievement gap and also the opportunity gap? And is that systemic? Is that something that society contributes to?
Here's the thing about achievement gap. The achievement gap technically does not exist. And when I say it does not exist, it is just the results. All right. So as educators, we're constantly looking at data and analyzing data. However, there's something that was the precursor to that data. Did students have equal opportunities to be able to have those higher level classes and those rigorous courses and excellent teachers as all the other students? What do I mean by that in layman's terms? There are certain educational systems in which they look at the child where they come from, their behavior problem. Oh, we're not even looking at you. We're not even considering you to put you in these classes. So what are you doing? You are closing the door to an opportunity.
Okay. There
lies the opportunity gap. Okay. Here's the other side of it. And I've seen it in my 25 years of education. There are our brothers and sisters who are not Black and brown, who might pity our children and say, oh, you know, he comes from such a rough background and, we're just gonna kind of appease and baby and not continue to challenge them where they are, hold the bar of expectation where it needs to be and scaffold so that that child can build themselves up to where they need to be. So when I say opportunity gap and expectation gaps, that is what we are in control of as educators. The achievement gap is just the result of whether or not you are giving those opportunities or having high expectations.
Wow.
Can I jump in real quick?
Go right ahead.
It's interesting that you say that. When writing, I actually try not to mention achievement gap, white or black achievement gap. I don't think it exists. I simply think it is a measurement to show how much of a disservice the United States, if you will, or really the country or educators or the system has done to those who are, as we would call, underachieving.
Okay, okay. And we don't want to neglect Kalila and Dr. Bennett here. So Kalila, just to go back to the question that Pastor Young asked is, what is the role of educational leaders in when it comes to social justice and education?
Well, I think first and foremost, educators have to operate within a system that, in order to be productive, they have to consistently criticize and reflect upon the current status of the education system at any given point in time. And I think going forward with that understanding, then you, as Rachel was saying, have to acknowledge that the curriculum is important, simultaneously recognizing what your role as a teacher is for the students within your space, because it's not a template that can just be applied to every classroom. Each classroom has different needs, different students within those needs. And I think when we think about non-Black teachers or non-teachers or teachers that are not of color, they're entering the space already socialized to subscribe to this achievement gap and already socialized to understand what types of students there are and what archetypes there are of a child that is underachieving. And so there is rarely an instance where there's a strong appreciation for students that do overachieve. And if so, they're left to fend on their own without the necessary support to propel them forward, because teachers are agents of change within the education system and are necessary to encourage students that may not have the support outside of the space. The teacher is an integral character, I would say, in childhood development. And so whether it's in the classroom or outside, teachers are imperative.
Okay, okay, okay. Dr. Bennett?
Okay, thank you first off for having me on the program. And it's Attorney Bennett, not Dr. Bennett. But just the same, in regards to that question, I think the first thing we have to do is look at what the role of the education system is in the overall system.
Mm-hmm.
The educational system, the American educational system, is designed to train people, fundamentally designed to train people to fit within the system.
Mm-hmm.
Fundamentally designed to get people to accept the system.
Mm-hmm.
The African American people in this country are an oppressed people. When I attended Dartmouth College, an Ivy League school, school designed to train the children of the elite in the United States. There were only about 20 African American students out of about 5,000, 6,000 students. There weren't any African Americans living in Hanover, New Hampshire. So the workforce at Dartmouth was composed of poor white people. And the well-off white students who attended Dartmouth and for whom the educational system at Dartmouth was designed, called these poor white people, working class whites, Emmets.
Mm.
In other words, they were the bottom dwellers in that environment. And I saw how they treated the Emmets, or the working class whites, poor working class white people, in many ways, or in some ways, quite the way that we as African Americans are treated in the general society. So the question becomes, given the fact that we are an oppressed people, as Rachel was saying or suggesting, question becomes, how do we transform ourselves from bottom dwellers, oppressed people, in a society that oppresses us? How do we train ourselves or educate ourselves to become change agents, not just for ourselves individually, but for our people as a whole. So as educational leaders, we have to first understand the nature of the education system in the whole society, the overall society. And we have to learn a pedagogy of the oppressed,
Okay.
meaning that we cannot accept the basic precepts that the people who run the society teach us. For example, we know better than to believe, we African-American people know better than to believe that the American society was founded on freedom, equality, justice. For us to believe that, knowing the history of the United States, would drive us crazy. So we have to know what our history is. We have to know America's history. And at the same time, we have to teach, learn to teach pedagogy, that is an education in which we trained ourselves to think outside of a system that's designed to keep us oppressed. Even when we attend the elite schools, such as Dartmouth and Yale Law School, it was a system designed for me to simply have a place alongside those who are among the elite, white elite.
Interesting. Yeah, Attorney Bennett, you just reiterated what Dr. Preston just said, right? Which was that the system is not designed for minorities. The system is not designed for minorities. In fact, it's basically designed to keep.
It is designed for so-called minorities. It's designed to keep the so-called minorities on the bottom.
Okay, so it's designed to keep them on the bottom. Okay,
Yes.
and so here's the question then, and you educators know this, right? How does the system do that precisely? How does the system? Because we can see, we can look at some people and we see people like Obama, we see individuals like yourself, as Dr. Preston says, we are privileged. We see ourselves and we see that we have actually, if you will, made it. Okay, then how do you then explain that the system is basically designed to keep us on the bottom?
As Christians, we are taught to be in the system, but not of it.
Okay.
And that applies to the secular world as well.
Okay.
We have to be in the system, but not of it. I'm not a white man. I don't desire to be a white person. At the same time, I do desire to be a very accomplished person.
Okay.
There's nothing racially based about being accomplished. And so we have to learn, as we always have, the African-American people, Black people worldwide have been very creative, very resourceful in surviving in the system without identifying with the system itself.
Okay.
I would also like to add that the reason why that's also possible is because that's how the system's supposed to work.
Okay.
If we were to keep every Black and brown person oppressed and low-income person oppressed, then it would be obvious that the system doesn't work.
Okay.
But when we can point and say, well, Obama is president, and the vice president candidate is a Black woman who graduated from an HBCU, then you can say, well, the system isn't broken. It's just,
Okay.
Then we can point to the low-income students and the people, and we say, well, they just don't want to try.
Okay.
They're not trying hard enough. They're not intelligent. They're not studying. We turn and we place the blame on the person instead of the system. So as long as we allow some people within the system, you can't allow everybody. Affirmative action is a prime example. You can only let one or two people at the table. But as long as I let the one representative in, they claim the system isn't broken. You just aren't working hard enough. And oftentimes that's where we find ourselves is placing the blame on the oppressed instead of focusing on the oppressor, as Attorney Bennett mentioned earlier.
Wow. That's deep. That's deep.
I think it's also important to add that there are aspects of the system, for example, charter schools that further the agenda of the system by targeting communities and being established in spaces where there are low-income families that do not have the resources to get their kids into private schools or higher performing schools, and so are completely reliant on the charter school system. They also have to then accommodate with the many different ways that children are disciplined and often systematically kicked out of the same charter school that they're welcomed into with open arms. And you also have to look at the people that are investing in charter schools. For example, Mark Zuckerberg and other large, I guess, billionaires at this point that have taken a liking to investing in education, not to close or resolve or fix the achievement gap, but more so because it's a money-making thing.
So Pastor Brown, I was going to actually say what Deshaun was saying is that in a way you could look at it by saying a few of us may have beat the system. As Deshaun said, overall, as a whole, we are not beating the system. And so I would just piggyback. I watch some of y'all, I'm a sports fanatic, so I like watching Undisputed. And so I heard Skip Bayless and Shannon Sharpe as they were talking about social injustices within the sports system and just saying how some will say, well, look at LeBron, look at Michael Jordan, look. And so they're not looking at us as a whole, but saying Michael Jordan made it out. LeBron James made it out. So why can't you? But that's not the whole basis of everything. And then also, as Eva was saying, I would just add, as she was talking about the charter system, I just kind of wrote this down. Within the charter system, you can choose who comes into your charter system, but then in a public school system, you can't. It's so those Black and brown students that are in the public system, who do they have to look up to? Because you've taken all our superstars out of the public school system and put them in the charter school.
I think the mere fact that they have to say, well, look at this person, well, look at this person, is indicative of an inequity. If we all had access, then they wouldn't have to put that to the side and highlight LeBron or highlight Barack Obama, because it would be the norm. And I think what it does is, it's almost as if it's a smokescreen to make us Black and brown people feel comfortable about, well, look at what we've achieved. However, we're not thinking about, look at how much we've lost because of the oppression and how much further we could all be because we all have the opportunity and access.
That's profound. That's profound. That's profound.
I think it's also important to follow up with what Rachel said, to acknowledge that these anomalies that, if you want to call it, break the system or succeed beyond what's expected, there is a term that's used often called grit, and that because they exercise this amount of grit and rigor and overcame all of these obstacles, that it's possible, if you exert enough pressure on yourself, that you too can achieve. And I think perpetuating that idea within the school system is wrong, because education isn't supposed to be something where you stress yourself out and are completely overwhelmed and you're working 6 jobs and you're doing all of these things, whether as a university student or as a young child that is from a low-income neighborhood. The whole point of the school is to be a resource to propel you. And most of the time, teachers are not able to act as supporters to students because they're overworked and because they're overextended, having to address these issues with multiple students. So I do think it's important to say and acknowledge that a lot of the success stories were, one, a result of a lot of overextension of labor, and also there were supporters that were also non-Black and were also aware and actively working towards changing that child's path.
Okay. It's ever since, thank you very much, Kalila, and I appreciate that. You're absolutely right. They look at grit, and as Dr. Preston said, they look at these anomalies, if you will, and they point to them and say, well, if they can do it, then everybody can do it. So the system is actually working effectively. Ever since the, I guess when W, the president was running, George Bush was running for president, we kept hearing this term called school choice, school choice, school choice. And so I've been looking at this concept of school choice, and Kalila just mentioned it, talks about charter school. And how does that relate to the oppression? Is there a relationship between school choice and the disenfranchisement or the oppression of Black students, Black and brown students in our system? Is there a correlation between the two? Is school choice a dog whistle for, if you will, for those who understand it, to say, well, this is an opportunity for us to resegregate, resegregate our schools?
I feel school choice goes hand in hand with No Child Left Behind, which was also a W. Bush initiative. And when you look at the two side by side, it's, if you're a high achieving student, you can escape. If you're a low achieving student, we're going to do all we can to push you through. However, you are left without the skills to succeed. And I think you're starting to see the same issues come up with Common Core curriculum. And which is why this attempt to have a nationalized curriculum hasn't really succeeded, because you have 50 states doing their own thing, and suddenly we're all supposed to come together, be under this one common curriculum that doesn't address disadvantaged students, that doesn't acknowledge them, that is also very, very good at excluding students, particularly migrant students, for example, or Indigenous communities. I'm actually rendered speechless by how systematic the US has been in their approach to using legislation, although federal, to come down statewide on schools and permeate access issues.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback off of that, I mean, school choice and especially charter schools goes hand in hand, if you really think about it, with gentrification.
Okay.
So what do we do in our major Black urban areas in the United States? The first thing white middle class suburban families are concerned about is in education. So in order for them to move back into the city, they don't want to send them to a failing public school. So I create a charter school where you have to have a voucher, or you have to pay, or we have a waiting list that you have to sign up for, and they're backed, as Kalila mentioned earlier, by billionaires and people who are really, when you think about it, interested and invested in gentrification in those particular areas. And then you have a place for your child to go. Once that happens, the school is up and you start to see the neighborhood change. We're in Atlanta. Look in the West End area. That's a prime example. You go to DC, prime example. Detroit, and the list goes on of these major cities that were heavily populated by blacks, and charter schools just took them over. And slowly after the charter schools came, gentrification followed. And so I think that's something that we often have to keep in mind as well when it comes to the whole charter school and how we look at that and how people get excited. And there's certain ways to look at it.
That's deep, Dr. Preston. So you're saying that charter school is the gentrification of education?
No, I'm saying charter school ushers in gentrification.
Oh, wow.
It's bringing it in. It's one of the first things we do. I get the school system right in the area where I want people to live, because people with money and high income will then move back in. I can't convince a white mother in the suburbs to move to West End if there's no good school to send her child to.
Okay.
So the first thing I have to do is get a school there that she deems worthy to send her child to, and then the process starts.
Wow, that's deep. That is deep.
Because even when you think about it, the school might start off Black, or there might be some Black students, of course, because you don't want it to appear as though you're segregated, things of that nature. But eventually, when you think about it, gentrification displaces a lot of low-income students and Black people. So those students will eventually be pushed out because they'll be pushed out of that community and out of that neighborhood, and the school will eventually turn.
Wow.
Or
Wow.
I should say, unfortunately turn.
Mm, mm, mm. Wow.
I'm going to go ahead and push us along a little bit by asking the next question. So the question is, to those teachers who are in the classroom, how do you see yourself creating an atmosphere for social justice? And that's anybody's question.
Okay. Um,
Were you going to say something, Howard?
no. It was a deep question, right? How do you create
Yeah.
an atmosphere of social justice? And I think one of the things behind that is that a good portion of the teachers, I think it's like 84% of the teachers are white. 84% of the teachers are white, and majority of these urban schools are 90% Black, and so we have 84% of white teachers teaching our students in the classroom. And I know that many you are administrators, teachers here. How do you protect kids in the classroom from that type of discrimination when a majority of the teachers they come in contact with are people of different ethnic groups or ethnic background?
I think as educators, we're the gatekeepers of our own classrooms. Like, I feel as if within my classroom, it is my job to take care of my students or any student that I come into contact with. And so relational capacity is key for me. Way before curriculum, I want to make sure that those kids know that I care, that they're valued. I've seen, I'm not even going to say that Black teachers treat Black kids well all the time and white teachers don't. I have seen white teachers who truly care about those kids, who's truly willing to learn about their background and talk to them and just be sincere. If their heart is in the right place, they can reach those kids. But what has to happen on a larger scale is that some of the teachers are simply uninformed, disconnected. Many of the white teachers that I work with, sometimes the only interaction that they have with Black kids are the ones that they teach. They have no idea that we have such a varying levels of kids from so many different backgrounds. And so the one that does do well, like Deshaun was saying, it's like, oh, they're so shocked. This year, our valedictorian got accepted into so many Ivy League schools, and he is now at, what's the main one there in Connecticut?
It's
Harvard. Harvard. And everyone was just so surprised, like, wow, you made it. And it's about the perspective. It's about teachers changing the way they think about the kids that walk through their door and truly opening up their mind to every kid has an opportunity. And the social justice comes when you mirror it. So when things happen in the classroom, you have to be an agent, a social agent as well. When things go wrong, when things are said, whether a Black kid or a white kid says the N-word, let's stop, wait, pause, let's have a conversation about this. As opposed to just kind of, well, it was a Black kid that said it, so we'll let it go. And many of them don't discuss it because they're uncomfortable, because within the system, we're not teaching cultural awareness or cultural sensitivity. That training has to happen for those teachers who are not comfortable in having those conversations. Going into the school year this year, my principal reached out to me because she wanted me to talk to a non-Black and brown teacher because she was uncomfortable with the social unrest. She's like, I really just don't know how to have the conversation. And I could appreciate that, because what that means is she's opening the door to educating herself on how to start to have these conversations. We have to stop putting the gas so much on curriculum and data and numbers and pause for the cause, as they say, and truly see, let's peel back those layers. Because as Attorney Bennett said, because it is systemic, it's not a surface issue. You have to go deeper. You have to be willing to have those uncomfortable conversations. Those people who are non-Black and brown, who truly are for the cause, have to be willing to call their counterparts out. There has to be a whole different dialogue that takes place that will trickle down into the classroom in order to have social change within the classroom.
Mm.
And so I would just say, go ahead, Attorney Bennett, and then I'll talk at the end.
I'm a little older, I think, than everybody, all the panelists, but I lived through the 1960s.
Okay.
And that was a very transformative period in American history. There were several such periods, of course, during the era for independence from the British, the Civil War, which freed us here in the United States, and the 1960s. Very transformative period in American history. And foremost among the leaders of this transformative period in the 1960s were African Americans.
Mm.
Not just in the civil rights movement. That's what we always hear. That's what the people who run the society want us to hear. But there were other groups, other trends of thought, other movements that existed as well. And one such movement was to transform I used the word, big word, pedagogy, meaning the education of oppressed people, in our situation, oppressed Black people. So what happened in the 1960s were that many of the forward-thinking, forward-acting Black Americans, African-American activists, if you will, set up satellite school programs that focused on teaching African-American students the real history of the United States, a history of the United States in which the African people built the United States, not just in terms of buildings or whatever, but being the foundation as slaves for the development of the American capitalist system and the wealth, generating the wealth that exists in the United States today. And those satellite schools or satellite programs, if you will, taught African Americans self-esteem, self-respect, how to maneuver in a world that was opposed to our being, or to the extent that they allowed our being, exploited us. That movement faded out, and didn't just fade out on its own accord, but there were deliberate efforts to end it, and it did end. So the schools themselves, the educational system itself, is not designed to bring about all of these changes.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to know that. There are some things that obviously the teachers in the classroom can do, that is those who themselves know progressive thought, let's call it that. But we as a people have to train our children ourselves beyond what's in, you can't just let them be in the classroom and expect that they're gonna come to understand the American society and understand their role in the society beyond simply being an oppressed people. So we have to do that. And that's something we don't do today. Like I said earlier, I had a friend, well, we all know the word genocide, and I have a friend who used to say, with regard to the training of Black people, training of Black students, it's menticide, meaning that it's a corruption of our minds. You're being almost insane as a Black person to believe that the system is designed for the mass of Black people to rise to a position where there's decent housing for everybody, healthcare for everybody. And these are marks of success in the system, not individuals who might be become president or vice president. That's nice for those individuals. But the real mark of progress for our people is that there be housing, decent housing for our people, for everybody. Universal health care, why doesn't that exist? In addition to personal security, why should we be afraid of the police? That's nonsense. That does not exist. The situation here in the United States with regard to police force, it doesn't exist in almost any other country. Why does it exist here? It exists because it's designed to keep us in our place.
Mm, interesting, interesting. And Khalil, as I said before we came on, I respect what you're doing, especially your work in Tanzania, along with Attorney Bennett. You have a global perspective, and I think because of that perspective, you can do some kind of comparison between the education system here in the U.S. and what you're seeing abroad. So in that sense, how is the American system in relation to the other system that you've actually seen?
So I think the best way to start this off is to say that history, as Attorney Bennett was saying, is extremely important in the conversation, because although we here in the US are dealing with systematic oppression that's been intentional from the start, colonialism is what has impacted the African continent, I would say. And regionally very differently. So West Africa and East Africa have different issues, but you can trace back almost every instance of inequity to the moment foreigners arrived. And so if we're looking at what, I'll give the example of both Ghana and Tanzania just to be helpful. Ghana had the British for much longer than in East Africa. So they were colonized by the British, the Dutch, the Spanish. There was a huge European push, mostly due to the slave trade. And as a result of that, there was tons of infrastructure after independence already established due to the slave trade. And in East Africa, it's a little bit different, whereas Germany colonized Tanzania for the longest period of time. And because of the terrain and landscape of the country, they didn't really go too far into the interior. So looking at these two countries, you have Ghana that's at the forefront of quote unquote development, and you have Tanzania that isn't. And a lot of those reasons are for the involvement of foreign powers. So although colonialism is over, it's still, functioning within businesses, et cetera, in a more submersive way. And how that's impacted the education sector is that in Tanzania, students and anyone with the hope of joining the knowledge economy are reliant on non-governmental organizations, whereas in Ghana, there are more private schools, international schools, public schools, free basic education that's quality. Whereas in Tanzania, the government doesn't currently invest a large amount of money into the public provision of education. And so a lot of it is left up to, foreign investors that come in and decide to start organizations and build schools. And what's imperative to assess is that with these schools, it doesn't matter your background, it doesn't matter your qualification, you're not having to follow any legislation, you are allowed to build this school because you have the capital to do so. That being said, me, if I'm as a Black person, I've entered that space and it's predominantly white. And so because there is no awareness, there is no unlearning of institutionalized racism, you have people that come from the eastern coast of the US, Boston particularly, and show up in Tanzania. They build a school. They want to help these children because they believe they're the most disadvantaged in the world. And when you look at it in comparison, a lot of the Black and brown students in the US have the same issues as students in Tanzania. It's not necessarily, if we're looking at it economically, it's not as disproportionate as people would believe. Just because you may see traditional homes built from mud or cement and they're not, representative of what we understand to be a home, doesn't necessarily mean that the family's impoverished. But again, how you're institutionalized to perceive something is how you operate. And so you have these investors that come in, they start these schools, and the metrics, the goals that they intend for the students, we want them to be global learners, we want them to reach new heights, we want to give them everything possible. But what's lacking is cultural awareness. There's no discussion of the African diaspora in a lot of these schools. There's no discussion of the history of the school and how it impacts the current plight of a lot of these students and why they don't have access to education. Most schools do follow the national curriculum because it's the best way to get on the government's good side. However, a lot of the times, if you have a primary school or a secondary school, the investment stops because you're just here to provide education. You're not here to provide the future for a community. You're not here to invest in the next generation of children. You're here because you think it's a good thing to do and you want to be seen as a good person. And because of that intention, it prohibits a lot of these students from achieving, and not because of a gap, not because of an opportunity that's missed, but because you have someone that's come in and told you to dream and told you to soar and told you to meet this expectation and you will succeed, and they let go of your hand halfway through that process. And then you have a lot of these students that will graduate from high school per se, but they can't afford university. And so they're still in their communities. And the same thing happens here in the US. And so I think it's interesting within the global conversation is to just recognize that, as Rachel was saying earlier, the intention of a lot of non-Black, non-brown, specifically white teachers or white educators of those, or those in the business of educating, what are their intentions? Because that intention is what's going to set the pace for the result. It's going to set the tone of how they will approach things. It's going to set whether or not they're going to intervene. And I personally believe that all teachers have to be of an abolitionist mentality where you're not trying to exist within a system, you're trying to take it apart. And so, you know, with the students that you're working with, you cannot be a teacher in my mind and believe that it's okay for you to vote for Trump, but you're an educator and those two things are separate. Because if you are really a teacher and at the core of your job is to help a child to learn, you therefore cannot support someone who's put children in cages. That just doesn't make any sense on a fundamental level. So I believe that through my global experiences, the work that I've done, that what is next is not necessarily alienating or stepping away from white teachers, but encouraging their own learning, not doing it for them, not forcing it on them, but encouraging it. And because they are the majority, there's no way to fully liberate, you know, ourselves from this system without co-conspirators. And encouraging these conversations and having them respectfully, of course, the end goal is solidarity, right? Because we cannot do it by ourselves. We've been oppressed for so long that there are people that have lost, and I mean through eugenics, have lost the ability to advocate for themselves. And so we need everyone that is of the belief that teaching is what their passion is, recognizing that not all teachers are passionate about teaching, but still saying that while I'm here in this space, I'm going to advocate for my students.
Wow,
Let me speak to that a little bit, since I've traveled to Africa so many times, including Tanzania and Ghana. In many ways, Africa has gone backwards, as in many ways we have, compared to progressive movements in the 1960s. And when I say we, I'm talking about us as a people in terms of our own sense of ourselves and our sense of our well-being. In the 1960s, 1970s, Africa, generally speaking, was in a very progressive phase. In Tanzania in 1970, my first visit to Tanzania was 1970. I hitchhiked through Tanzania. Julius Nyerere was the president of Tanzania, and he espoused what was called African socialism, as did Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, MPLA liberation.
Call the roll.
Yes, exactly. The MPLA liberation movement in Angola, Frelimo in Mozambique. So these were progressive movements to move Black people, the citizens of these countries, and Black Africa as a whole, away from the ethos, away from the teachings, away from the whole mindset of the colonial education. And they made great strides in doing that. And I give an example. 1970, I attended a lecture at Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda. The lecture, it was I was hitchhiking through East Africa at the time, and there must have been 400, 500 students from all over East Africa at Makerere University. At that time, the East African community existed. The debaters, it was not a lecture really, it was a debate. And I'll try to be as brief as I can. Debate between two foremost scholars. One was a man named Walter Rodney from Guyana. And he wrote a book called How.
Yeah, he got assassinated, didn't he get killed?
Yes.
How Africa was colonized.
And you mentioned that he was assassinated. And then when you know what he was talking about and how he was trying to move the thinking of Black people forward, then you know why he was killed. But he wrote a book called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, a brilliant book.
Yeah.
Then he was debating a professor named Ali Mazrui, which took the traditional view that the elites, white elites, the colonial elites, taught Africans and taught us here in the United States as well. They debated. And the audience was overwhelmingly in favor of Walter Rodney, this truly progressive African man from Guyana, African Guyanese, if you want to call it that. At any rate, that kind of thinking, that kind of intellectual ferment, and I've traveled Africa a lot, it doesn't really exist in Africa today. As you said earlier, Walter Rodney was assassinated, and he wasn't assassinated just because he was Black and happened to be walking on the street. He was assassinated for political reasons.
Of course, of course.
Anyway, exactly. So anyway, Africa today generally, and most of these people, the professors, et cetera, who teach at these universities throughout Africa, Ghana and everywhere else, they're trained in the West. They're trained at the same schools where I went to school and the rest of the panel here went to school, universities, et cetera. So their thinking is not a lot different from our thinking, most of us. It's the same. And so what has happened has been a step back from the progressive move forward for Africa to this running in place. All of these countries are running in place. Some are running in place fast, some are slow walking in place, but it's still running on the same treadmill, essentially going nowhere. Meaning you have a few in these countries, an elite in these countries who rise to the top, so to speak, like us. But the vast, here in the United States, but the vast majority of the people in these African countries are just as poor as before.
Dr. Bennett, Attorney Bennett, that concept of colonial education, our curriculum is designed. That's what I'm getting from you. That our curriculum is designed specifically to keep us thinking in a certain thought pattern. And that's not, and I see Dr. Preston shaking his head, that it's intentional. It's not that we go into a classroom and pick up a book and teach our kids, but that we are taught to teach our kids a certain type of information that keep them oppressed. Yeah. Right now, I see we have a number of individuals who've asked questions, and Pastor Miles has a couple questions that a number of panel members, not panel members, but viewers have asked. And Pastor Young, you want to share a couple of those questions?
Just before we do that, Mr. Hickerson was trying to say something a while back, and I wanted to give him an opportunity to address that question. You got cut off.
Oh, no, that's fine. Let's listen to the questions because I may be able to incorporate it through some of the questions.
Okay, got you. All right, let's go ahead and hit the first question from the chat. So someone asked, if the system isn't working, what's the answer?
First off, it is working. It works very well. It doesn't work well for us, but the system works very, very well.
Interesting.
The billionaires are still wealthy in all this pandemic. In fact, many of them are making even more money in the pandemic. Now, poor Black people are dying, poor white people are dying and suffering as well. But the billionaires are doing quite well. So the system functions extremely well.
Wow.
Yeah. However, it is working well, but if we're gonna put some optimism to all of this, I would say learn the system and then use the system to your advantage. And so what do I mean by that? I think we have put in our mindsets that success means I have to go to elementary school, middle school, high school, and then I have to go to some Ivy League school, get a job in the C-suite, and make millions of dollars. That is detrimental to most students if you put that in their head. Everyone isn't even meant for that. Even if you have the capability, I know people who have the capabilities to go to Howard, go to Yale, go to all of your schools and to get PhDs and all that, and they will be miserable. They don't even want to do it. It's not their calling. It's not what they want to do. That's not even what they find to be successful. And so ultimately, I think one way to beat the system is to educate a student based on their passion and what they want to do and what they find to what they define as success, but then also teaching them life skills, how to navigate this world. Because honestly, you can do well in school, but if you can't, you can do well in college, but once you graduate from college, if you don't know how to navigate life, you will fail. There are people with degrees who live under bridges, and I don't think oftentimes we think of that. There are people who were doing well in the pandemic hit, and life is just it's exploded. So I think we sometimes do our people a disservice when we don't teach them how to be financially literate. When we don't teach them how to balance. Well, we don't balance checkbooks anymore, but make sure you're doing certain things. You're doing certain
balance being broke. How about that?
Yeah.
I think what
ultimately that's where you kind of get at, though.
I was just gonna say, I think what you're alluding to is IQ versus EQ. People IQ so much, but they forget about the emotional quotient. Studies show that it's people who don't know how to get along with people, don't have those soft skills, that cannot move forward. And I think you hit on something very important. Teach them how to navigate through that system. As an educator, my first goal with my students is let's stop focusing on the grade, because the grade is something that was put in place that you're supposed to try to reach because of some construct that someone built for you. Let's focus on the learning. Let's the education part of education. And so once you are empowered with that learning and that education, the grades will come, the opportunities will come. And those opportunities are not just necessarily a straight path towards college or university. You could be in the military, you could have your own business. I think it's really opening them up to the fact that you actually can do this. This is not just a dream. It is a goal, and let's get some action steps in order to help you get to that goal.
So there are these, as I was telling Pastor Miles, that I could basically incorporate. So you basically took us right to that question. I can still incorporate what I was going to say. But this goes back to the beginning when we were discussing, and I was basically saying about white collar and blue collar. So that goes right back to what Rachel just said, and as what Deshaun was saying, we have to challenge the system within our school system, teach our kids, we just need you to be a community partnership, better our community. That's all we're asking. And so if you are white collar or blue collar, teaching life skills, we need plumbers, we need carpenters, we need doctors, we need attorneys, we need dentists, we need managers at Walmart, whatever your passion is as Rachel said, we don't have to send you to Harvard. We need cooks, mechanics, we need all of that. So just imagine if we teach our kids to focus on their passion and they live right within our community and we're all working together. That's the ultimate. And then what I was going to say, Pastor Miles, before, this could be a question for Deshaun and also Attorney Bennett, but I was going to say something about the school to prison pipeline. That's another thing that we're having an issue with, which is causing this dismantle with our students because of the zero tolerance, not understanding our culture.
Wait, Dr. Hickerson, you're running too fast here, man. You're running too fast here. You just said something here that just like blew my mind, right? You said a school to prison pipeline. I mean, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so when you hear that term, basically it's just talking about the disproportionality tendency of minors and young adults from disadvantaged backgrounds that become incarcerated or become because of increasingly harsh school municipal policies. So if you have a Black student or a Black or brown student that curses in the classroom, so I'm going to suspend you for a day or two. So then you come back, maybe I smart off with one of the teachers in the school. So instead of trying to understand maybe what that child may be going through, maybe that child didn't have breakfast before they came to school. Maybe that child got into an argument with their mom or their dad, or maybe that child saw their mom being beaten by some man before they even came to school. So they're already walking into the building angry. So as soon as they walk into the building, they're angry, they smart off with the teacher, they curse, they do something. Okay, I'm sending you right back out the door. I suspend you. And if I continue to suspend you, then you're going to find something else to get into. So when we're saying the school to prison pipeline, the more I suspend you, I'm just pretty much putting you out of school. I'm taking that interest away from you. Now you're going to focus on getting into trouble, which is going to apparently send you down that road into prison.
Wow. And you're aware, we're talking about Trump. Kalila, you mentioned Trump, and I'm surprised that he's been only mentioned, one time, right? For the night, right? I don't know if I'm in an alternate reality here that Trump is only mentioned one time, but we see that Trump has made some significant changes to education through Betsy DeVos, right? That that amazing individual, Betsy DeVos. And then you see, I know. Calm down, pray about it. Listen, so right now we see that Trump, through Betsy DeVos, reversed some of the Obama initiative. And one of those initiatives, LeVar, is that schools should not suspend and expel Black kids disproportionately, but we see that Betsy DeVos reversed that policy. So now schools have basically don't have to abide by any kind of rules when it comes to Black kids, that they can suspend them as much as possible. What is the impact that decision has had on our schools thus far?
And so I saw Rachel was about to jump in. So just before I'll just say just the fallacy of that, just what you just said. We're going back and forth. So bottom line, hold every single child accountable. That's what it really all comes down to. So I'm not saying that I should let you get away with cursing a teacher out. We're not saying that it's okay to fight in school, but let's sit down and get to the root of the cause. So what's going on? This child is coming in angry for a reason. So that's where the counselors and social emotional lessons come in, so that we can try to get to the root of what's going on with that child. Now, if that child is continuing to disrupt the learning environment, then yes, we are going to have to come up with some type of disciplinary action for that child. But let's just think it through to where we're just not throwing them out by just suspending them all the time, but just kind of having, different types of disciplinary actions for our kids.
What LeVar is talking about is restorative justice.
Mm.
We're so focused on the what that we're not focusing on the why.
Okay.
The what is just the result of it, but you hit the nail on the head, LeVar. And I think after, being in education for 25 years, that is something that is disheartening to me, that everything is business as usual. All right. We have all these rules in place, and, we understand that there are certain things that are in place for the safety and protection of everyone, but we can't be so rule driven that we just completely overlook and overrun the very people that we were called to reach and to teach. And I've seen it many times when a kid is labeled. Let me tell you my philosophy on good kids, bad kids. I do not label children as a good kid or a bad kid. And let me tell you why. Because when they're labeled, I'll start with a bad kid. When they're labeled as a bad kid, it's like there's nothing they can ever do to be in that better place where people are looking at them as, oh, wow, you have the potential. We're going to open up opportunities for you. We're not going to do that because we don't want bad kids. The good kids become entitled and get away with things because they have the label of being good, as opposed to looking at the behavior and the reason behind the behavior. That's how you start to open the door for these kids, is stop looking at these kids as you're a menace to society and we've got to deal with you. Hence, school to prison pipeline. We're going to keep you in check. We're going to keep you in place. Instead, let's take the time, like LeVar said, to figure out what's going on. Maybe not every child we're going to be able to restore that thing that we're looking for. However, the numbers can go down considerably, because what we do know, Black and brown children are disproportionately getting in trouble, getting suspended in the ISS, as well as special education. That's a whole nother can of worms that we can open. But that whole restorative justice piece, it is not as pervasive as it should be within our school systems, because we're too busy going back to, let's look at our numbers. We want to be #1 in the country. We want to be #1 in the country, but what's happening to some of our children in the process? At what cost is my question.
And it's a question. I know I won't take away from Pastor Young here. Do you think that Black people have perpetuated this injustice against Black students for the sake of appeasing their white counterparts? I mean, anyone can answer that. LeVar, do you think that Black teachers have been party to perpetuating injustice against brown and Black students in order to appease their white counterparts, or to attract white students or white people to their building? Deshaun Preston.
I don't want to say yes. I actually want to say they are a product of their environment, or they're struggling to combat the system. So what do I mean by that? So Rachel Lombard said you want to take the time to talk to a child, but when you talk to most Black teachers, if they're working in a Black area, low income area, they don't have the time or the resources to even begin to do that type of work. So it's not, even if I want to do that work, I can't send you to a counselor because the system has taken away the money and taken away school counselors. I can't send you to seek the help, the special attention that you need in order to succeed. Teachers can no longer do that because they're taking all of their resources away. It's like, and not to get into the whole conversation, but when you really look at it, with the whole defunding of the police, people are saying, look at education. We've been defunding education for years. That's one of the first things we decide we want to take money away from when the government is in some trouble. We say, let's cut back on these kids. We can't keep giving them all of this money. We need to give them to the Fortune 500 companies, the tax breaks and all above, and get in that line. But ultimately, I'm asking a lot of these teachers to make brick without hay. And it's impossible most of the time. They're burnt out. Teachers they're tired. So I won't say that they're perpetuating an ideology to appease white people. Shucks, white people probably not even thinking about us to even be considering trying to appease them like that.
All right.
There's a couple things. I'm gonna throw two darts out there. Somebody can grab it. So one thing is, if you are in a failing school, Deshaun just said this, if you are in a failing school, then you receive resources so that you will not be a failing school anymore. But as soon as you are no longer a failing school, they take your resources. So it's a revolving door. It just continues to go, And then the other thing that I would say is what Deshaun was stating. If you are let's say, for instance, if you are an African-American teacher and you grew up in a middle-class home but you're teaching in a low socioeconomic community. Sometimes you forget, or sometimes I don't know why they acting like that. When I grew up, my parents would have done, or in my household, we would have done this. But see, now you're forgetting. And that would be the part that you cannot forget where you come from. And so when you're going into those poor socioeconomic communities, you can't forget where you've come from. And that's basically what I would say from there.
Wow, that's deep.
Would agree with what both LeVar and Deshaun said. I think that some teachers become disenchanted. Like they first come out, they're excited, you know, all these opportunities, all these new ideas that they have. And then they get in there and the system is not set up in such a way where if you are having a repeated issue with a student and you don't have the time to stop, because while you're stopping with this one, you got the other, 29 of them that are bouncing off the walls. And so what starts to happen is, let's say you do refer the student, nothing happens to them, they're back in your classroom. You now start to slowly but surely, it starts to wear away at that very thing in you that was so motivated to make a difference. When you ask teachers, I want to make a difference, I want to make a change, it's almost like, I hate to use this terminology, institutionalism. You become institutionalized. Like what happens with people in prison when they come out, they're like, well, when you come in, it's like you just kind of fall in line, or you kick against the prick, or you get into some good trouble and start asking questions like, why are we doing this way? This does not work. All that's happening is the kids are spending more time outside of the classroom. There's got to be another way. So to Deshaun's point, one teacher alone cannot do it. The system has to be able to change, but I have never seen in my experience per se, a Black and brown teacher doing that because they're trying to appease a non-Black and brown teacher. It really is just because they become disenchanted. They become worn out. They don't know what else to do. And they start to take the behavior personally.
Okay. All right.
Sorry, I hate to interrupt. Trying to get through as many of these participant questions as possible. The next one says, what are some actions we can take to help our students in light of everything we've heard today?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, in light of everything we've heard today, everything we've discussed, what are some actions we can take to help our children, help our students?
I think we have to listen.
Okay.
Let me tell you something that weighs heavy on my heart. When George Floyd passed or was killed, I thought to myself, school was out, it was June. And all I thought to myself is, how are my kids doing? And because of what I do in the program that I run, I still have their information. So I reached out to them and remind, and I held this event called Breathe. And I wanted them to talk about and give them a safe place to talk about what's going on. Because when we think about it, they've been through some traumatic experiences. They were literally ripped out of school in March. For them, they're like, that's their whole life, the socialization piece. And now they are subject to, when you think about it, they are living in a world where they can see Black and brown people that look like them being killed on camera, on TV for everyone to see, and wait for justice to be served. As adults, we could barely wrap our brains around that, much less the kids. So I think we really have to be willing to take the time to listen to them, because right now we went straight into virtual learning. So I'm wondering, what are the schools gonna do when they actually physically re-enter? What is gonna be in place so that these kids can actually figure out, where do I put this? Where do I put the fears of people who look like me are being killed? That is an important question that we have to ask. So we have to listen, and when we listen, we have to act.
Mine's is quick. Get involved, and you have to do some things at home yourself. I think someone alluded to it earlier. You just can't count on a teacher in the classroom. So oftentimes you might need to go and teach your child Black history, or you guys can learn it together. Learn about the systems that are in place to try to keep your child and yourself down as a Black person, as a low-income person, and ways around it. you know, and what you can do to uplift others and to build others up. So I would just more knowledge, more involvement is extremely important. Know what's going on in your school systems around you. What's if you have a child, know what's going on in your child's classroom, what your child is learning, things of that nature. I think too oftentimes we send them off to, you know, we'll send a kid to school and then we feel like we've done our due diligence because they have food and a place to stay. And that sounds good in theory, but it's just not enough.
Mm.
So I would just simply say, apply the knowledge. We're constantly talking about everything that you are taught in school. Can you apply it to life in general? Basically, incorporate current events. That's basically what Rachel was just saying. Talk about the current events, have a discussion, listen, and then again, everything that you're being taught in the classroom, can we apply it to our life? Because that's really what it all comes down to.
Let me say this with, with regard to higher education. I'm involved with the Black alumni of Dartmouth and what some call a Black Lives Matter initiative. And what we are trying to do, the leaders of this coalition of Black alumni and Black faculty and Black staff at Dartmouth, is to make Dartmouth a relevant environment, more relevant environment to the Black students. So we are trying to, as the questioner put it, help the Black students. And this is at the university level. And as part of our initiative, what we are doing is meeting online or virtually through Zoom meetings with the president of Dartmouth and the board of trustees. And our objective is several-fold. One is to increase the number of Black students at Dartmouth to approximately at least 13% or so. That's the official percentage that we have in the country, according to the US government. And we've been at that for about 50 years now, but just the same, increase the students at least to 13%, increase faculty, Black faculty to about 13%, and then also change the curriculum. Change the curriculum at Dartmouth, meaning when I say change the curriculum, well, yeah, change the curriculum to teach the true history of the United States. That's important. To teach the true history of the United States, not just for the Black students, but for the white students as well. I'm a history major from Dartmouth, an honors history major. I learned history with about half the book missing. Many of the pages in the history books that I learned, from which I was taught, had missing pages. Those missing pages were the truth about America's history. We must know and tell yesterday's story so that our present will be unburdened by yesterday's story and our future made new.
I think I would say that as a student currently sitting in a dorm and almost, I think every day since, so when Ahmaud Arbery was killed, I was still in Tanzania, and being in that space and having those conversations with the students I was working with was very emotionally exhausting, because as the only foreign Black member of staff, listening to white people explain police brutality and the history of oppression in the US showed me very clearly just how much they didn't understand. And I think that as a Black student, not born in this country, I know America's history more than most white Americans do. And I think that is also a requirement when you move into this country, because you have to learn it, because here I am Black, I am not Jamaican. And so moving forward in my academic path, you know, being on campus now, almost every day we've received an email indicating to a safe space for Black students to converse, or a space for, there to be more conversations. And if I'm being genuinely honest, it's exhausting. And so I think there has to be more spreading of that labor, because we are expected to endure, we're expected to survive, and then we're expected to teach and explain. And I think the biggest opportunity cost is the stressors and the burnout that comes with that. But what I will say, I have seen more now than I have in previous Black Lives Matter movements, like in 2015, when I was an undergraduate. There are more faculty coming to the table, and there is a more, I would say, widespread acknowledgement of what is going on. It's almost as if now non-Black people are able to acknowledge this. And I think while we're still at a point where people are comfortable saying the word Black and not just African American, these conversations should continue. These interrogations of practices, of tenured professors, of faculty members, of majors, and even, for example, a lot of universities don't endorse African studies or African American studies as a department, whereas other ethnicities get that space. I think that is a huge thing in academia, that validation of being a department is almost saying, this is worthy of a major. And so to see that happening more widespread, I think, is what is necessary.
I absolutely agree with that. I want you guys to know I could talk about this all, or listen to you all talk about this all night. However, we have reached our mark. But I want to first personally thank all of you for bringing your individual experiences and personalized knowledge to this. Thank you for allowing us to pick your brains and just grow our personal databases and perspectives and understanding on this. So thank you so much for being here with us. I'm going to go ahead and pray us out and let you guys get back to your evenings. Thank you once again. Let's pray. Thank you, Lord, for just giving us each of these individuals, Father. Thank you for giving them different individual perspectives, Father, giving them different passions and fires, Father. Thank you for using them in different ways to affect change and advocate for your people. And thank you for bringing them before us today so that they can just pass that torch on to us. I pray that everyone who listens to this conversation is not walking away unchanged, Father, but further motivated to create change in a world that desperately needs it. I pray that you be with us now. It's your mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Pastor Brown, was there anything you wanted to say?
No, and listen, thank you very much, panelists, for joining us this evening. As Pastor Young said, I was enlightened and I could listen to you talk the entire night. Well, thank you very much. I want to thank again Pastor Howard for leading out in this initiative. It was his idea for us to have this conversation. And so I want to thank him for the support Pastor Howard is passionate about, and the West End community is passionate about making certain that every single member of our society feels welcome. And that's what we aim to do as a church. And we hope that this conversation we had tonight will shed some light, a little bit of light on what we can actually do as a community to change America so that every person, whether they are Black or white, rich or poor, can have the same opportunity for success. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate you and looking forward to see you guys in church tomorrow. God bless y'all.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you for having us.
Going to